Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to unpack the incredibly complex congenital structures of the human chest. We'll be taking a full anatomical journey, starting from the outer wall and moving all the way down to the diaphragm. It is absolutely fascinating how much the underlying architecture of our bodies dictates our daily function. And today, we're looking specifically at what happens when that architecture develops a little differently right from birth. Okay, let's dive right into this with a really fascinating question to guide our clinical exploration. What can the outer shape of a chest actually tell us about the vital organs hiding inside? Well, as we're about to see, the surface of the body is very often a direct window into the mechanical reality of the heart and lungs. So here is our anatomical roadmap for today's explainer. 1. The thoracic landscape. 2. Congenital chest wall deformities. 3. The clinical inspection. 4. Congenital lung abnormalities. 5. Diaphragmatic and associated hernias. And finally, 6. Clinical impact and management. Section 1. The thoracic landscape. Before we can even spot an abnormality, the absolutely crucial first step is establishing what a normal, symmetrical chest looks like. In a healthy adult, the chest is roughly elliptical in cross-section. The key here is that the anterior-posterior diameter, so front to back, should always be less than the lateral diameter, side to side. Clinically, you might hear this referred to as Hutchinson's index, which normally sits at a ratio of about 5 to 7. When this ratio drastically changes, that's our very first major clue that something structural is going on. Section 2. Congenital chest wall deformities. Now let's look at the structural contrast between two completely distinct congenital deformities. On one end of the spectrum, we have Pectus Excavatum, which is commonly known as a funnel chest. This is a developmental defect involving a localized depression of the lower sternum, literally giving the chest a sunken-in appearance. On the exact opposite end, we have Pectus Carinatum, or pigeon chest. This is where the sternum and ribs point prominently forward. Interestingly, this protrusion can sometimes develop due to lung hyperinflation while the bony thorax is still actively growing, like we sometimes see in cases of chronic childhood asthma. Moving from the textbook definitions to physical reality, seeing the actual presentations on patients is undeniable. You can clearly see the structural deviations from that normal elliptical shape we just talked about. The deep sulcus of the funnel chest and the outward protrusion of the pigeon chest are incredibly pronounced. It's one thing to learn the medical terms, but visualizing the physical alterations really highlights just how dramatically the skeletal framework can shift. So here is the so what of it all. This isn't just cosmetic. A depressed sternum can literally compress the heart and restrict the lungs. For example, Pectus Excavatum can physically displace the heart to the left side of the chest cavity. Because the volume of the chest has essentially caved in, it severely restricts the ventilatory capacity of the lungs. For young patients, this often presents primarily as exercise intolerance, particularly when they hit those adolescent growth spurts. And it's definitely worth noting that these deformities don't always happen in a vacuum. They're frequently associated with connective tissue disorders like Marfan syndrome and Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, as well as spinal curvatures like scoliosis. Section 3. The clinical inspection. Knowing all this, how do you actually feel for these anomalies? Using a tactile approach demonstrated by Dr. Gill, you step into the shoes of the physician by resting your palms perfectly flat on the patient's chest to feel for symmetrical mechanical expansion. You ask the patient to take a deep breath in and out, and your main job is to watch and see if your thumbs move apart equally. If the chest expansion is reduced on just one side, it immediately red flags an underlying abnormality, whether that's a rigid chest wall issue or something much deeper, like a lobar collapse or unilateral fibrosis. And there's actually a highly structured anatomical map for exactly where to place your hands on both the front and back of the thorax to catch these hidden issues. It's not just a random pat-down, right? You have to check high up near the clavicles and low down near the diaphragm. The movement of your hands is going to be remarkably different for someone with a normal chest compared to a patient with, say, a hyperinflated barrel chest typical of COPD, or the heavily restricted movement you'd see with severe kyphoscoliosis. Section 4. Congenital lung abnormalities. Let's go a bit deeper now. When we look at the internal landscape, genetic mutations can completely hijack the way the respiratory system functions. Take cystic fibrosis, one of the most common life-threatening autosomal recessive conditions. What's wild about CF is that while it is systemic, affecting everything from the pancreas to sweat glands, it manifests most fatally right in the lungs. It all stems from a mutation in the CFTR gene on chromosome 7, which acts as a chloride channel. This triggers defective chloride secretion and increases sodium absorption across the airway lining. The end result? Thick, sticky mucus that sets the stage for chronic infections and can lead to congenital bronchiectasis, which is a severe abnormal dilation of the airways. We also see rare conditions like pulmonary alveolar proteinosis, where surfactant-derived compounds accumulate and physically clog up the alveoli. Ultimately, both the bony deformities we saw earlier and these internal tissue diseases culminate in what we call a restrictive ventilatory defect. This is a physiological reduction in the lung's ability to fully expand. If you're looking at lung volume charts, a restrictive defect means the total lung capacity is significantly shrunken. Whether the lungs are trapped in a rigid bony cage that simply won't expand, like with severe scoliosis or Pectus Excavatum, or the lung tissue itself has stiffened up from fibrosis, the outcome is exactly the same. The patient's ability to take a breath is severely limited. Section 5. Diaphragmatic and associated hernias. When we map out the mechanical breaches at the abdominal boundary, it becomes super clear that defects here are rarely isolated incidents. A hiatus hernia, for instance, directly impacts the thorax because the stomach is literally pushing up through the diaphragm, which often leads to severe reflux. But consider congenital abdominal wall defects in infants. Gastroschisis, where the bowel protrudes to the right of the umbilicus, carries a 4% risk of concurrent congenital heart defects. And even more severe is exomphalos, where abdominal contents sit completely outside the body inside a 3-layer membrane. The surgical challenge here isn't just fixing the abdomen. Trying to fit those contents back into a small cavity can acutely compromise venous return to the heart and restrict lung ventilation. Plus, exomphalos carries a notoriously high association with other cardiac defects and spina bifida. Section 6. Clinical impact and management. So how do we manage all this? Well, while many conditions, especially mild chest deformities, are simply observed and have very little functional significance, surgery becomes absolutely vital if the structural integrity of the chest starts to fail. The indications for surgical correction are quite strict. We step in if there is a severe, symptomatic deformity that is actively progressing. We also operate if we see paradoxical respiratory chest wall motion, meaning the chest is moving in the exact opposite direction it should be when breathing, or, of course, if imaging proves there is active cardiac or lung compression. We literally have to correct the mechanics before the heart or lungs suffer irreversible damage. To wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a really powerful thought regarding patient care. A condition like Pectus Carinatum might barely restrict a patient's breathing on a mechanical level, but the psychological weight of having a visible deformity during adolescence, that can be absolutely crushing. As clinicians and healthcare professionals, how do we balance the raw metrics of lung capacity with the very real human experience of living inside these conditions? It's where anatomy directly meets empathy, and it's a dynamic I really hope you continue to explore. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer today.